You know, all my grades will be submitted online, you know. So, okay, so look for both a review sheet and a question pool later this afternoon. Well, I'm going to finish up this PowerPoint on utilitarianism. I may review a little of what we did, but we saw that Mill tried to defend utilitarianism. Let me pass around a roll. Hold it. Let me pause this. Sometimes I'll accept them later, but if something's not in my hands by next Friday, there's no guarantee that it'll be counted. I mean, you got to make a cutoff point somewhere. You know, it's not going to be good enough for somebody to come back and say, well, I emailed you my term paper, you know, during final exam week. Well, you know, sometimes when remember, we have deadlines too. You know, I mean, sometimes I am so busy, I don't have time to go mousing around the internet for somebody's, you know, late papers. If it's not in, it's not in, you know. So that's why I offer no guarantees if things are not in by the, at least the exam period. Okay, so Mill tries to defend utilitarianism against the claim that it gives us a very low view of human nature, viewing us as mere creatures of pain and pleasure. And Mill says, not Mill, but Bentham said all pleasures are on a par if their quantity is the same. And so if that's the case, the pig in the field who gets as much pleasure from eating slop that the farmer puts down for them, you know, as the person going to the opera, well, all pleasures are on a par. So what's the difference between human pleasures and those of an animal, you know? And this was criticized as a pig morality. I didn't make this up. I didn't put the pig stuff in there. That's the way people responded to utilitarianism. And so Mill tries to say, wait a second, we can talk about higher human pleasures. No human being would trade places with a pig. And why? Because there are things they can appreciate and that make their lives worthwhile that the pig out there in the field knows nothing of. And so Mill says there are higher pleasures, and for him they were the pleasures of the intellect and the imagination. And these pleasures are uniquely human and things that the pig in the field can't appreciate. And he puts them as higher than the pleasures of mere sensation, like the pleasures you get from eating and drinking. So Mill says it's better to have a higher pleasure, even if the total amount of your happiness or pleasure is not as much as somebody's might be if they are experiencing a lot of lower pleasures. He says it's better to be Socrates dissatisfied but having the pleasure of discussing philosophy than a fool or a pig satisfied. And so basically, what this shows, though, is that it's better to have less pleasure but have it be a higher quality. Well, this shows that there's some other standard of value being sneaked in. In other words, what separates out these higher pleasures and makes them valuable in themselves cannot be pleasure or happiness itself, since Socrates is here as having less pleasure. He's dissatisfied. But Mill says this is preferable because he's got a higher pleasure. So what this does, I mean, this is a subtle point, but it's worth trying to appreciate it as a criticism. What this does is it effectively sneaks in other standards of value. And this conflicts with hedonism because hedonism says only pleasure or happiness is valuable in itself. Whereas what makes higher pleasures more valuable is if it's not just more pleasure, then they're valuable in themselves for some other reason. So what makes higher pleasures higher cannot be pleasure alone. Some other standard of value is sneaked in, and this would undermine, as I said, the hedonist claim that goodness or happiness alone is valuable in and of itself. Now, most modern utilitarians are pluralists. In other words, they recognize multiple standards of value. They would agree with the hedonists in that they would say, well, yes, human happiness is valuable as a good in itself, but other things are also valuable for their own sake. Like knowledge is an unqualified good, some people would say, or self-realization, the satisfaction of human preferences. We're not going to go into detail on this, but most modern utilitarians are like Jonathan Glover, recognizing multiple standards of value. As Glover says in the video, he says, I find it hard to determine whether I'm a utilitarian. He says, if you take a hedonistic standard, that all that matters is pleasure in the absence of pain, Glover says no. But he says if you make consequentialism sufficiently pluralistic and still call it utilitarianism, that is, if you recognize multiple standards of value, then he says, yes, I'm a utilitarian. Now, a notable exception to this is Peter Singer, who's an old-style Benthamite utilitarian. I have, as one of the extra credit options, a lecture by Bentham, where he tries to apply utilitarianism to animal rights and our food choices. So this move then, recognizing overtly other standards of value, abandons hedonism, because hedonism recognizes only one standard of value, pleasure or happiness. Excuse me. I don't have a cough switch like you have on radio. The cost. Well, we said something about a cost-benefit analysis, that this is another way. And let's talk about the Bakun Dam moral question. One way you can reason that out as a utilitarian, and this is going to be one essay question option, is on utilitarian hedonistic terms, right? In other words, you're talking about balancing out the higher lifestyle of maybe hundreds of thousands or millions of people who will now have a higher standard of living because they have more electricity available at a reasonable rate. They can run work-saving modern appliances that make their lives better, right? You also can run machinery in factories and have economic development and jobs. So you're and that gives people a higher living standard, makes their lives happier. you're balancing that out against the pain of the displaced natives and the animals in the forest who are going to be moved by the project. So one way of working out whether it's right to build the Bakun Dam is in hedonistic terms, but another way is by doing a cost-benefit analysis and asking yourself, well, do the benefits, the economic benefits of building that large hydroelectric dam justify the costs? In other words, are we going to get more benefits than costs by building the dam than not building the dam? And from a strictly economic basis, it's hard to say that the answer would be no. Seems like you would. And I think that's one reason why these decisions were made. So, so you can apply utilitarian reasoning using a cost-benefit analysis to an issue like whether to build the Bakun Dam. And here you get around Bentham's problem of specifying a hedon. You may not be able to exactly define what's to count as one hedon's worth of pleasure, but we know what counts as $1. So we're back to having a countable unit we can define, you know. And so this is utilitarian reasoning because it weighs the good benefits against the bad costs and recommends action on the side with the most benefits over costs. And again, what I said before is this is how decisions are made in a single-payer healthcare system. Care is rationed. In other words, in a single-payer healthcare system where the government is the single payer, what some people would like to see happen here, like Bernie Sanders, and the president, I guess, the cost of your care, if the government is a single payer, is the cost to society. So society might say, well, you know, if you need a life-saving operation, as I think I said last time, in the British system they use QALY, quality adjusted life years. If we pay for that operation, are we going to get enough bang for the buck? Are you going to have enough quality years of life if we save your life to justify the cost of the operation? You know, so you know, so it's made. So what are the advantages of utilitarianism? Well, we said utilitarians tried to respond to Humean skepticism about morality by saying, if we can get morality out of the realm of the otherworldly and make it concrete concerning things in this world, then we can introduce reasoning back into moral matters. So utilitarian is concrete. It removes morality from the realm of the transcendent and otherworldly, because morality for the utilitarian is not following the commands of God, following the dictates of a transcendent God. Now, remember, both Bentham and Mill are living in England where there is a state-sanctioned religion, right? The Church of England, the Episcopal Church. So they both had to defend utilitarianism against the claim that their moral view is anti-religious and specifically anti-Christian. They both tried to do this. Whether or not they succeeded is, you know, I guess something people still debate today. But I personally don't think that they do. But you know, but what they're trying to say is, if we make reasoning about a moral matter a matter of talking about what promotes the overall happiness of society as a whole, then we can get it down to earth, and we can reason about moral right and wrong independent of any theological considerations. So they would say our view is not anti-religious, but it gives you a way of working out moral right and wrong without bringing in religious assumptions. Also, they don't think that there are universal moral laws built into the fabric of the universe as utilitarians. So that, they would say, is a selling point for it. So morality just becomes a matter of, instead of something otherworldly, of promoting pleasure or lessening pain for real people in the real world we live in, and for animals as well, for Bentham. Now, utilitarianism enables us to take what some philosophers call the moral point of view, which is the point of view where you're able to stand back from a situation to take what's called a disinterested perspective. That's not uninterested, but a disinterested perspective means that you reason things out as if your own interests weren't at stake in your decision. You just are asking, well, what is the right thing to do morally here? And this can support altruism because you're not aiming at your own good. Bentham said our own pains and pleasures should count, but he said in utilitarian reasoning, each is to count for one, but none for more than one. That is, our own pains and pleasures do matter, but no more than the pains or pleasures of anyone affected by our action. So utilitarianism as a moral theory allows us to do what egoism can't do. That is, get ourselves out of the way and make our moral decisions solely on the basis of what we think is right. Egoism, you can't get yourself out of the way because it says the morally right thing to do is what is in your own best self-interest. Okay? So it's straightforward and objective views. The right course of action simply is what produces the best results in the world we live in, and recognizes, as Peter Singer said in the video, that morality should make a difference in the world. Again, if you have not viewed the video, I put a link to it on your Blackboard site in an announcement. Recognizes that real morality often balances off the interests of the many against the interests of the few, and we saw that in the issue of the Bakun Dam, right? We're balancing out the interests of the larger population of Malaysia, who will probably benefit more than be harmed by building the dam, against the interests of a subsegment of the population, namely the 10,000 native peoples living in those 30 villages that will be displaced by the project. You know, across the street, if this is your first semester here, there was a whole block of homes just like the block next to it. We leveled, essentially, a whole, or at least half of a whole city block of homes to build that new technology center, because we put the interests of society generally, and building a state university, or part of it, over the interests of those individual people in those individual homes. Now, I'm sure they were compensated for their homes, but maybe not in a way that they thought was fair. And maybe they didn't all want to move, you know. So we balanced out the interests of the larger society, you know, against the interests of the few. So now some people would think that's an objection to it, but some of the stock objections are that utilitarianism, by focusing on the future, on future consequences, you know, forces us to imagine what the consequences are going to be. And that's not always easy to do, especially if you're talking in terms of a large project. I was talking about the Big Dig in Boston, this huge infrastructure project where they did not take into account how hard it would be to build tunnels for subways and stuff in the particular soil they had under Boston, and doing that so close to the ocean. And the project ran over budget by a factor of about 5 or 6. In other words, it wasn't just over budget a little, it was like 4 or 5 times what the original estimates or cost estimates. So sometimes it's very hard to estimate what future consequences would be, even, as I said, for predicting somebody's future enjoyment or pains and pleasures. We try to do that, but there was a time when Uncle Vic had to realize that my niece and nephews were getting old enough that I couldn't really predict that any shiny little toy I could get is something they would be pleased to open at Christmas time. It was better to give them you know, a gift card and let them make their own decisions. You know, we can't always predict what's going to produce pain and pleasure in somebody else, because these are unobservable, and at best we can make only educated guesses. Also, I mean, utilitarianism has us compare very diverse things. Suppose you're in a job you don't like, but you know, if I work extra hours, get some overtime at this job, I can buy a new 60-inch flat screen TV for the next football season. How do you balance off the negative experiences of working more hours at a job you don't like, you know, versus the positives of having a new flat screen TV? Demands too much of us. Make some discretionary duties mandatory. I'm not going to dwell on this a lot, but Peter Singer says, you know what? If we're going to be good utilitarians, we need to realize that our number one moral obligation is to promote for the whole world the best balance of happiness versus unhappiness, and to lessen pain. And he says, let's think about your discretionary income. If I go buy a new 60-inch flat screen TV, I'm going to have some pleasure having my buddies over, you know, to drink beer and eat wings and watch football in the fall. But it's arguable that the same money would produce a much greater impact in terms of lessening pain and promoting happiness if I took that money and instead of buying the flat screen TV, I gave it, say, to famine relief in the third world, you know, in, say, sub-Saharan Africa. Now, see, a lot of people think, well, okay, this is a discretionary thing. Hey, it's nice if you want to give to Oxfam or to World Vision to help food aid, you know, in the third world. Hey, that's a good thing to do, but, you know, it's up to individual choices. But no, says Peter Singer, Not if you're going to be a good utilitarian. You need to see it as your moral obligation to not spend that money on that flat screen TV, but to send it overseas to something like, famine relief in the third world, because that is going to produce more of an impact in terms of producing happiness and lessening pain. And that should be your moral obligation, not your discretion. So, anyway. Also, as I said, utilitarians have used an argument for mercy for legalizing what is called active euthanasia. Passive euthanasia, the Greek simply means a good death. Thanatos is the Greek word for death. It's the difference for some people between killing and letting die. Passive euthanasia is taking somebody off a respirator, for instance. But active euthanasia is giving them a drug that essentially induces them to expire, that kills them. Well, utilitarians argue, hey, we do this for our pets rather than have them suffer. Shouldn't it be legal to do this for human beings? And so they say there's much less pain produced in a person if they're allowed to choose euthanasia rather than go through the next 6 months in excruciating pain from, say, late-stage cancer. But an argument against that is, well, what if we do make something like that legal? Wouldn't people be subtly pressured to, quote, do the right thing? To not place the additional financial burden on society of caring for them in the hospital for the next 6 months, but just do the right thing and opt for euthanasia even if they don't want to do it, even if they're not ready to leave and they're willing to put up with the pain and discomfort. And so you could say we violate their right to life by forcing them to do this. Some say it recommends immoral actions. Richard Taylor has an article where he tries to defend having love affairs because he says in most cases they produce more pleasure than the downside. But if you say my spouse would be devastated if she or he found out I was having an affair, well, Richard Taylor has that base covered too, because he says, well, on utilitarian moral grounds, you can justify lying to your spouse about the affair. So in one article, you get a justification both for adultery and lying. And so some people say, well, if this are some of the results of a moral theory like utilitarianism, then, get me off here. I don't care for the moral theory. Now, so these are some of the stock criticisms. Now, let me just note one thing. What follows in this PowerPoint is a technical distinction that deals with some of these criticisms between act and rule utilitarianism. I usually do not go into that part of this in an intro class. Remember, I also use these slides in things like general ethics and business ethics, where we're going in to utilitarianism at a more technical and deeper level. As well as other ethical theories. So don't worry about those slides that follow. You can jump past these. Boy, this thing is so slow. can jump past these. One other reply that utilitarians make to the charge that their theory conflicts with what our intuitions, our everyday morality says is right or wrong. Basically, they would say, well, how do you know your moral intuitions about right and wrong are accurate? They say, we've got a technical theory that gives us a rational justification for why we think our theory is right. So basically, they would say we ought to just bite the bullet on utilitarianism's counterintuitive consequences, and they'd say we ought to opt for utilitarianism, even if it doesn't always give us results about right and wrong that are in accord with our ordinary moral intuitions. You know, in other words, utilitarians would basically say, well, this is what utilitarianism says. Hey, deal with it, right? To talk about it. Okay. So let me bring up a few things. Again, for folks, let me stop this. Well, your exam note is a week from today. For folks who came in late, I'm going to post later this afternoon both a question pool for the final exam, because I want you to be able to have it over the weekend. I wasn't thinking yours was this early. Otherwise, I would have printed one out for today. There will also be a review sheet, probably later this afternoon, posted. In addition, I'm going to give you, I have a canned review that covers most of the points out there on YouTube, and I'm going to give you a link to that as well. So, you know, if you want to get some studying done over this weekend, you know, you'll have some materials, including a recorded review session, some of the best of Vic Morawski. Now, look, I told you, at Essex, I had to throw all my stuff on YouTube or lose it because they stopped using Tegrity. And so I've thrown some of the stuff from Coppin as well up there. But here's what you want to note, okay? You get 2 hours to do the exam, but the exam is Friday the 11th, a week from the day, but it starts at 10 o'clock, okay? Make sure you note that, because I'm not staying past 11:50 for somebody who's late. You know, you're supposed to know when your exam starts, and also, as far as test essays, if you owe me anything, that's the absolute last time I can guarantee that it'll be counted. Anything that's not physically in my hands when I leave that exam room, there's no guarantee that it'll be counted. So if you owe me a term paper, or if you're prone to get in your test essays late, you need to overcome your procrastination, you know. Because, I mean, again, I told people earlier, this is not like the old days. In the old days, we used to physically have to come in and turn in a sheet with grades